Well, in this session, we're going to talk about something that's just a little bit complicated. And there's no shortage of differences of opinion amongst the experts as to what the best method is. But I'm going to let you know what my method is, and it's worked well for me for 50 years. So it might at least do in a pinch. Now, what we're going to talk about is gluing and clamping. It's very, very difficult to separate the two because how you clamp sometimes affects how you glue, and vice versa. Sometimes the type of glue that you choose to use is going to cause you to use a different method of clamping. So they're so closely interrelated, we're not going to be able to separate them for this video. So we'll just go ahead and do both of them. We'll talk a little bit about glue in the beginning, the different types and what the applications are for each of them. And then we'll actually get into looking at how you would apply glue. Are there some glue applications that are stronger than others? Do you need to add other kinds of reinforcing methods to your glue joint? There's a lot to talk about, and I'll try to get through it as quickly as I can, and we'll start that in just a moment. Now, when it comes to the type of glue that you use, you do have a number of choices, and a lot of times the type of wood that you're gluing affects the choice that you make. Now, this is what I would consider to be your all-around best glue. I do 90% of my gluing with Titebond 2. Now, so it doesn't get more confusing, there are three types of Titebond. There's Titebond, Titebond 2, and Titebond 3. I use the Titebond 2. Titebond 1 is more like the old Elmer's glue that we used to use. Titebond 2 is a little bit more waterproof. I like the way it goes on, I like the working time, I like the results. Titebond 3, its biggest advantage is it's 100% waterproof. You can take a glue joint that you've glued together with that, totally immerse it, and it won't let go. If you totally immerse Titebond 2, it will dissolve the glue joint eventually. It will take a while, but it's not 100% waterproof for Titebond 3 is. But anyway, my go-to glue is Titebond 2. Now, there's a time and a place to use two-part epoxy. It comes in several different formulations. This is 5-minute epoxy. It will set in 5 minutes. There's a 30-minute epoxy. But this is extremely effective when you're working with very oily woods. Most of the rosewoods are oily. Other woods that contain a lot of oil, they're difficult to glue. You can get around it if you take the pieces before you glue them together and clean them with acetone or lacquer thinner, where it would actually remove the surface oil. And then it's just the wood and not the oil. You put the 5-minute epoxy on it quickly, and it can set up before the oil can migrate back to the edge of the wood. And you can do the same thing with the Titebond if you clean the surfaces, both surfaces, with acetone or lacquer thinner. The third type that we have that's gaining a lot of ground is a super glue. It's referred to as CA. And I'll be honest, I cannot pronounce what CA is an abbreviation for. So we will just call this CA. It's a very fast setting glue. You can apply it, spray an activator on it, and it dries almost instantly. The downside of the CA is it's brittle. So there's no room for the wood to expand and contract. That normal expansion and contraction of wood with changes in temperature and humidity will cause a CA glue joint to fail much sooner than it would either one of the other two. But for a quick fix, it's not bad glue. But again, what you're going to find is your go-to glue is going to be Titebond. Now, we'll set up in just a minute and we'll talk about different types of joints and how you apply the glue for the different types of joints and how you would clamp them. Now, we need to just issue a small disclaimer at this point. What's going to be covered in this video on both gluing and clamping and types of glue and everything else that we'll talk about is just scratching the surface. But because this is still just a beginner class, we're not going to go into great detail and we're not going to cover a great deal of the exotic stuff. We're going to stick mostly with the mainstream stuff. All of the types of joints that I'm going to talk about right now, you will encounter in this class in one of the three projects that we're going to build. Now, the first thing we're going to talk about a little bit is wood itself. Now, wood has three faces to it. You have a face grain on the top and bottom. You have edge grain on this side. And this is the end grain. The end grain is where you can actually see the annular rings in the wood. Face grain and edge grain are similar, but they're actually not exactly the same. They have different properties. As you can see on this side, you can actually see the annular rings. When you look at the end grain again, you can see that they come out on the edge grain, and they're more horizontal on the face grain. Now, if this piece of wood were quarter sawn, it would be just the opposite. You would see more of this on the face grain and more of this on the edge grain. But we're going to get into that in more detail when we start talking about how a log is cut into lumber. So this edge grain and face grain will make a little bit more sense when we get to that video. The strongest glue joint is when you put edge to edge. You would do an edge joint for a couple of different reasons. If you were making a table and you're going to make the table 36 inches wide, well, you can't get a piece of wood 36 inches wide. So to get that width, you would have to take a number of narrower strips and glue them up to get to your 36-inch width. And that's what you would call edge gluing. And that is the strongest glue joint. When wood moves, it moves more across the face grain. If I took this piece of wood and took it to Mississippi, that's got lots of humidity, this piece of wood would expand. And even with this small width, it would expand a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. So it would be about a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch wider after a couple of months in Mississippi than it is here. But lengthwise, there's almost no movement at all. You will find only a few thousandths of an inch in where wood expands. It doesn't expand along the grain. It expands across the grain. So when you put the edge grain together and glue it, there's very little movement. The movement in the glue up would be in its width, not in its length. So that's the strongest way to glue up two pieces of wood, is an edge joint. Now, there's another joint that we use, and we will actually use it in the class, but it is the weakest joint. If you glue end grain to edge grain, like this, you find this kind of joint in cabinets, you find it in cutting boards, the way we're going to make it. There's a number of places where you have to glue end grain to edge grain. But you just have to bear in mind that's the weakest glue joint. And it's usually wise to reinforce that joint in some way. The problem is this piece of wood does not expand and contract along its length, because that's with the grain. But this piece of wood does expand across the grain. So when you put the two together and you have a change in temperature and humidity, this piece of wood wants to move, and this one won't let it because they're glued together. And that's why this is the weakest glue joint. Now the next type of joint that we have is a miter joint. Now you see miter joints, they're most common in picture frames, in face frames, in cabinet doors, and a lot of times in drawer fronts. But it's just a case where they have cut the corners at a 45-degree angle so that it makes a square or a rectangle. When you glue up a miter joint, and any of the joints actually, what you need to do is dry fit the joint and find a way to hold it in position when you dry fit, what you're trying to do is ensure that it's going to fit together. It's very hard to hold a bunch of pieces of wood together and be able to see for sure if it's all going to fit right when you put the glue on it. So, and a good dry fit clamp is a rubber band. You can use this very effectively on small pieces, but it will hold the wood so you can inspect your joints and to make sure whether or not they're going to hold and be tight. So this one looks good, so you would be able to take the glue, apply it to all of it. Then you would clamp that probably differently. Rubber bands don't make the best glue clamps. They make very good dry fit clamps. The problem is once you apply glue, that the water in the glue is going to absorb into the wood. And the wood is going to expand because of the water that it's absorbing. And it can throw off the joint because the rubber band can't hold it. It is still possible to expand with the rubber band on it. So you'd want something a little bit more solid. So what you would clamp that with that would be more effective would be something like this. Now this is a fairly common clamping method, if I can ever get it on here. Now, and it's a ratchet type clamp. You would simply apply ratchet pressure and that would give you the pressure that you need. And then as the wood absorbs the glue, it can't expand because this webbing can't stretch. So this is a good way to clamp a four-sided mitered thing like a picture frame. It's not the only way. There's probably 50 different specialty clamps that are designed to hold mitered pieces. And because of the length of the webbing on here, you can expand this to a very large size. So it's a very versatile clamp system. But four-sided miters are not the only kind. There are also multiple-sided. The first project we'll make has 8 sides to it. There's 8 pieces of wood. This particular piece here has 12 that are cut at 15-degree angles. Now these are very difficult to hold because it's so easy for just one to get out of alignment. So what I use to clamp these with, and it's the same thing that we'll use to clamp our octagon trivet, is a hose clamp. These are just designed to hold your dryer vent zone. They hold your radiator hoses zone on your car. And you simply apply the glue. Get the hose clamp out over the edge, and then you simply take a screwdriver or a nut driver and you tighten it up, and it will hold it securely while it's drying. So there's a lot of different ways to clamp wood once you've applied the glue. When it comes to actually applying the glue, there's a lot of schools of thought on that as well. A lot of people tell you have to put glue on both pieces. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've never had glue joints fail, and I only put glue on one piece. You put enough on that one piece for both. And you don't put a lot. All you accomplish when you put a lot of glue in a glue joint is a mess that you have to clean up when the whole thing's over. You put just enough to hold the piece. And we will talk a great deal about that when we glue up the first item. It's much, much easier to show you how to apply the glue than to try to tell you how to do it on a video. So this is just the absolute basics when it comes to glue and clamping. But it will give you a basis on which to build. And as you get into more and more complicated projects, your gluing and clamping will most likely get more and more complicated. And then you can just simply build on these basic skills that I've shown you here in this video. And that will be it for this time, and we'll see you in the next one.